Welcome, everybody. My name is Jeff McGinnis, and I am the National Beverage Director for the WineStyles family of stores. Very excited again to be bringing you one of our national virtual winery spotlight programs. Say that fast, super fast 3 times, sort of like a tongue twister. As we have shared, this is an extension of a program we've been doing for a number of years. We have been doing the national spotlight tastings in the stores for I think 6 or 7 years, where every single one of our stores participates. You come into the store, you get a great tasting experience. But given the current health pandemic, we have been a little bit health conscious and not having big groups of people in our stores, but yet want to continue to find a way to provide excellent education programming about wines to you, and more importantly, share some amazing wines with you. So we're going to continue to do this for the foreseeable future. We don't know if and when, hopefully when, things are going to get somewhat more under control and we can have you back in the stores on a more regular basis. But we anticipate that even when that happens, there's going to be a virtual component to it, because this has allowed us to connect directly with the winemakers, directly with the folks that are in there making the wines, and talk about what they're passionate about and share their information about their wines. With no further ado, I'm going to make our introduction here. 2 reasons. One, you probably don't want to listen to me talk. You want to listen to him talk. And 2, that he will be the one to allow you to have some wine. So Matthew Rawn is with Two Mountains Winery. They are the provider of our wine club wines for this month, not only the 3 wines, but a bunch of additional wines. So I'm going to hand it off to him. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in chat. I will be facilitating questions as we move along.
Well, cool, guys. I guess I'll kind of jump in here. And please do ask questions whenever you guys have, whenever you have them. I think if I'm understanding everything correctly, everybody kind of wants to go through the wines. If you guys want to know more about Washington, I'm more than happy to talk about that as well. We can do all kinds of stuff. This is education, and at Two Mountain, we love education about wines, region, grape growing, what's happening with crush. It doesn't matter. Anything we can do to kind of help everybody become a little bit more comfortable or familiar with wine, and basically make it more fun, we're all about. And fun is a floating definition, as you guys all know, when it comes to wine. It's sometimes it's learning, sometimes it's tasting, sometimes it's just sitting with your friends, whatever the situation is. And that's how we like all of our wines to be able to interact with all of us individually. We're really proponents of that definition, and so that's what we're going to try to do. So by all means, shout if you guys have any questions, or I should say, type. I guess probably not shouting. I don't know how that really works in this very well, but we'll give it a shot. And we'll kind of go from there. So I believe the first wine is Riesling. Is that right? Or is it Sauvignon Blanc?
I think we're starting with the Riesling. Absolutely.
Perfect. And I don't know, Julie, if you have the if you have like the Washington AVA map that I sent you, if you guys want me to share it on the screen or try to share it, but if you guys want, we can do that at some point in time so that we can, I don't know, how do I get on the main screen here? I'm not sure. I see someone asking that question. Anyway, I'll let the experts figure that one out. But anyway, we can kind of show some things, whatever. But so I guess let's go into the Riesling, and we'll kind of talk about that for a second, and then I'll kind of tell you about this little kind of what we consider to be a pretty special and unique place in the world of what you guys are tasting in all your bottles today, and as well as give a little bit of history of what you guys are tasting, like who we are and where we're from and whatever the case is. So the first one we're going to have is Riesling, and don't be scared, please. I mean, I feel like I do say that a lot to people, but I really do mean it. Like, Riesling is absolutely fantastic. It doesn't have to be that sweet, syrupy dessert wine that a lot of us remember, that we either stole or snuck from our parents or whatever the case is. But Riesling is a really, really, really pretty grape and pretty variety. And the fun part about Riesling is it's very flexible. It's a very flexible variety that you can make ultra sweet dessert wines with. You can make sparkling wines with. you can do semi-sweet, you can do completely dry. And when I talk about dry, I'm talking about the level of sugar. And so anytime you guys are talking, yeah, not Blue Nun, hopefully, not this one. But Riesling really has the ability to kind of be any style that you want. But one of the fun things about Riesling to me is once you start getting into it, is it's a very, very expressive variety as to where it's from and kind of the personality of the people making the wine. And I think that's important. Like, to me, a lot of people think Cabernet Sauvignon is kind of the king of grapes, and I think Riesling is kind of the queen. I think it's absolutely stunning. It ages super well. It's incredibly aromatic and flavorful. But the bigger thing is wineries kind of need to get out of its way and just let it be its own being at times. So this is the 2019 Riesling. This was harvested exactly a year ago, almost to the week. Actually, it was harvested almost to that point in time. In fact, we were just crushing some Riesling for some neighbors just 2 hours ago, just right out my window here. And this is, although this is listed as Washington State, this is predominantly from our Copeland Vineyard. It's all from the Rattlesnake Hills area of Washington, which is the westernmost region of the Yakima Valley growing region within the state of Washington. But a majority of this comes from the Copeland Vineyard, which is the vineyard I planted back in 2000 when I graduated from university. And this Riesling sits, Washington's this weird place. I'll get into it in a minute, but this Riesling sits really kind of on this gravel bar that sits out in the middle of our vineyard. So the vineyard has this crazy undulation and kind of diversity of soil in it, and right out in the middle is this great big gravel bar that has no reason to be there unless you understand the makeup of why Washington is Washington. And it's just cobble and caliche and sand and a little bit of loam and whatever else. And when I taste this wine, like, I always want to be able to smell and taste a little bit of that kind of flinty and gravelly characteristic in there. I think some of the best Rieslings in the world have that characteristic, and I love the fact that ours does. So we try not to get in the way of that, and we let it kind of be. And this one is the 2019. It really might be my favorite one that we've ever made. I can remember a handful of vintages that were right up there, but this one seems to hit all the points to me. It has that really fruity and beautiful aromatics on the nose and the very front of the palate, and then it finishes nice and clean and crisp in the back end. And the flavors in this thing that I get are they just pop. And that's really what our goal with Riesling is, well, with all of our whites, is we want the wine to taste like the grapes do coming off of the vine. And I highly encourage any of you guys that have the chance to get out to any wine country during harvest time. And if you come across anything that's named Riesling out in the field or in the vineyard or in the crush pad, don't be afraid to, ask very sternly that I would really like to try those grapes, because when it comes out of the field, the Riesling grapes they just explode in your mouth. It's an amazing, it has an amazing flavor profile when it comes out of the field. And what I think what you would find if you had that opportunity to taste the grapes coming from Copeland right now and what's in your glass, you'd find a very, very similar characteristic to it. And I don't think
Hey,
that's
Matthew,
always
Matthew, quick question. I think I have the map up of the Washington AVAs. Let's see if I can do this without blowing Zoom up.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, that'd be great. Sorry for my hair, guys.
Oh, no, you're good. All right. Hey, hopefully everybody can see that right now.
Yeah, perfect. That's perfect. And all right, so I don't know. Can you zoom in on that at all? Perfect. That's even better. So where we are is, if you look at the, actually, can you scroll up just a little bit so you can see majority of the state? And that's perfect, right? Actually, down just one click. Perfect, right there. We can make that work. So what makes Washington kind of cool, and this will happen with all the varieties, is that if you look at this map, in the very center portion of it, you'll see an area that says Horse Heaven Hills, Yakima Valley, and Rattlesnake Hills. And I'll get into really the specifics of what makes Washington in a minute, but you can see we're right where that identification line that comes off of Rattlesnake Hills that goes into the AVA. That's kind of right where we are. So we're the western side of it. We're a little bit higher elevation, and we're really right on the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. And we're so in that vein, that's where we that's where we sit. So we're kind of South Central Washington State. We're only about, as the crow flies, probably only 75 or 80 miles from from Oregon. And then we are equidistant from Seattle, Washington, and Portland, Oregon. So both road miles and aerial miles, we're just about equidistant. So we're kind of in this cool little place. At least we think it is. But I guess we better since we live here, right?
Hey, Matthew, real quick.
Yeah.
Maybe speak to, obviously, as we go through this, one big thing that I want to touch on is your family history in wine, going back 4 generations, and then how you guys started as farmers and now winemakers, but then also the name, Two Mountains. Where that comes from in relation to the geography.
Absolutely. So, so while we're having this Riesling, why don't you guys want to get on the next wine? We kind of talk about all of it together, or how do you guys want to do it? I'm good with anything.
We can talk about them as we go, and then shoot
Perfect.
on to the next wine as well. I'm not sure where everybody's at in the wine. Looks like a lot of people are finishing up that Riesling. It's a really nice, bright, crisp, wonderful wine. Not the blue bottle Riesling that everybody sort of should be shying away from.
No, and you want to know what's funny is when we first started, we actually put it in a blue bottle, but it was still dry like this, and it was really funny, but it worked at least at the time being, and then we were able to graduate into more of a green bottle. So
the folks that don't, what I love about this wine is we did a blind tasting with Riesling, with an Australian Riesling a couple months ago. And what I love all Rieslings, but this one, if you taste blind, this is that Riesling that people don't enjoy Rieslings will love, because it blind tasted wise, you almost think it's like a Pinot Gris or a Chardonnay. I mean, it's got so many wonderful nuances between all of those different flavor profiles. And those folks that don't like Riesling, I will bet you that they really like this wine, because it's not your grandma's Riesling, I guess I would say, and that's in a good way, I guess.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
It's fabulous.
Thank you. But it's one of the things you'll notice when when you go through all of these wines today is that hopefully our wines are not completely versatile or pigeonholed. I don't like one-dimensional wines. I like wines that you can drink them in multiple situations with multiple people and palates and multiple foods, and it doesn't much matter. I mean, we're not that stuck on something has to be, one side of it. There's a question about residual sugar percentage. This is actually less than 1%. If memory serves, it's like 0.4, 0.5% residual sugar. It's not much. And this is actually one of the drier ones. And so one of the things that we do with our Rieslings on an annual basis is I do not, and this is really the way it is with our Rosé and with our Sauvignon Blanc as well, is that with all of our whites, I don't necessarily believe in specific numbers that dictate the wine or the winemaking side of it. We, especially on whites, are much more beholden to how does it taste and what is the profile of it. So we've had Rieslings in the past that have been upwards of 1.5% residual sugar, but the acid was through the roof, like almost 10 grams to the liter of acid. So we had to leave some sugar in there to balance out that acid, but the profile was very similar. And then we've had ones like this that are much, much closer to zero because the acid was a little bit lower, and we were able to kind of keep that balance and keep that mouthfeel and aromatics and flavors all involved the way we wanted them to. And I don't like pigeonholing things. I mean, I figure we're in the flavor business. We as consumers are in the flavor buying business, and all of us that are selling it are in the business of selling flavors and experiences to people. And I find that if you try to make specifically white wines like a certain residual sugar percentage every year, you are always leaving something on the table. On years that are high acid, and you say you always want to do half a percent sugar, you'll feel like the enamel stripped off of your teeth. And years that are low acid and at 1% residual sugar, you'll feel like it's the sweetest wine you've ever had. And I think that you're doing yourself and everybody else, and primarily the vintage, a disservice at that point in time. So we are much more beholden to where are the flavors. The numbers are very important to us, but they're not the identifying marker of what our wines are in that aspect. So just for whatever that's worth to people.
We want to start talking about the Sauv Blanc, and then we can kind of pivot and talk about the history of the winery and your family and all that fun stuff.
Absolutely. So the Sauvignon Blanc, it's the 19 as well. And I'm tasting along with you guys. I even though I have to get back on the pad in a little bit, I'm going to taste with you guys, so bear with me. The Sauvignon Blanc, this actually is a blend of two vineyards. Again, estate grown, just like everything else that we make. And it is, it's a blend of our Marcella vineyard, which is high up on the hill in a very, very high or hot site, and our Schmidt vineyard, which is a little bit lower altitude, slightly cooler. But what we found is it's really fun in the fact that the hot site gives it, and there's a little bit of Semillon up at the hot site. I mean, I think this is, it actually is 7% Semillon this year because it's co-fermented. It actually grows right next to the Sauvignon Blanc that's up there. So we just pick it all together, throw it in there, and make a Sauvignon Blanc with it. And then we blend it with the Schmidt vineyard when we're done. But that hot site, the Marcella vineyard, gives it a lot more of that kind of rich, kind of almost like a South African style Sauvignon Blanc, where you get a little bit more of that boxwood, a little bit more of that tropical flavors, that kind of thing. And this lower site, the Schmidt vineyard, gives it a little bit more of that New Zealand style, a little bit grassier. And what we found is when we kind of combine the two of them, along with that little bit of Semillon that happens to come in, it gives it this real, in our opinion, a very interesting, fun dynamic of, you get a little bit of that crispness and that cleanliness that you would from like, say, the grassier style and the cooler weather Sauvignon Blancs, along with the flavors of a little bit more of that warmer characteristic. And then that Semillon kind of rounds out the back, just ever so, in the mid palate, just ever so slightly. So, but that's my interpretation of it. You guys all taste something different than I do, so I'll let you guys figure that one out. Yeah, well, thank you for yeah, and so it's interesting that someone says it's not too grapefruity, and I get a little bit of grapefruit on this, but that's just my palate, everybody tastes something a little bit different. So, and I keep referencing the fact that we're estate grown. This gets into the history that Jeff was kind of talking about, so our family has been growing produce, primarily tree fruit in this valley. We're the fourth generation on our current, in town here, third generation on our current site, and about fifth generation within the valley, or the boundaries of the valley. Our mom and uncles grew up across the street from where we are now. And then I spent my youth working in the trees, sweet cherries, apples, pears, that kind of thing. And my brother did as well. And when I graduated from the university, or from Montana State University, my uncle decided he wanted to diversify the family orchard and plant grapes with the idea of starting a winery. And this was back in 2000. And he had got the bug because a lot of his friends were the guys that started the Washington wine industry. The guys that are kind of on the Mount Rushmore of the state right now, the founders, are the ones that he was friends with and would buy wine from. And that's actually how I learned how to drink wine, was with his friends, where I was way underage, but no one really seemed to care back then, so we kind of did it anyway, as long as I kept my mouth shut. But I think the statute of limitations is gone on that, so we're probably okay. And what we did is we were able to take out an old apple orchard that my grandfather had planted in 1954, had taken out of scab land and put into apples in 1954. We tore that vineyard out and put in the Copeland Vineyard, which is what most of the wines that we're going to be tasting today have either all Copeland or a majority are Copeland. And so, I got done with college and he said, "Hey, I need some help." And I said, "Sure. I don't have anything else to do and it sounds like fun. Let's give this a shot." And so we did. And my brother came back out of college and after backpacking through Europe, and he started working here, and then he didn't want to leave and I didn't want to leave, and we were figuring everything out. And our uncle very unfortunately passed away quite suddenly and unexpectedly back in the spring of 2006. And so my brother and I scrounged up a few pennies and bought the winery and the vineyard and helped our aunt dissolve the rest of the family orchard business. And we've been here ever since. And so we've grown it to the point now that we're working with you guys on kind of on this scale of things, and we're still doing selling grapes to home winemakers that are taking 150 pounds and selling grapes to Chateau Ste. Michelle that's taking 40 tons, one of those things. So we're kind of all across the board. We're completely completely vertical, and we are actually first certified sustainable vineyard in Washington State now. We just got that by about a month and a half ago. So we went through the process to get certified by Lodi standards, and so we're, everything we learned and everything we always held true to ourselves as far as, taking care of the land, taking care of each other, taking care of, if you take care of one, the other takes care of itself, the other as well. We went through and finally got that certification and became the first ones in Washington to do so. I mean, our grandfather and our uncle, and just by natural intuition was, if you take care of the dirt, you take care of the land, you take care of the water, you take care of the people that are working with you, then things should end up okay. And so we wanted to kind of exemplify that, and we went through it, and we went through the process. So although these wines that you are tasting are not technically certified sustainable as of yet, all the grapes that they've been made with have the vineyards from that those grapes have been made from or made with are all certified sustainable now. So we're in that process. But in doing that, we have all these different vineyards that my brother and I have since acquired since we bought this, and whether long-term leasing or buying or managing for people, and allows us to be able to blend, get to know the land really well, and get to know the sites, and then we can blend the varieties, like the Sauvignon Blanc is through these two different sites. One's hot, one's cold, one's thin soil, one's deeper soil, and you get these different characteristics. And we can actually do that process a little bit differently than what everybody else can, because we are completely vertical in that aspect. And we don't have to rely on other growers. I rely on my brother, and he relies on me, and then we get on Zoom with you guys. So it's kind of fun.
One of the things that I like to do is fish for little nuggets of information on websites, and as we go through this, and as we're sourcing wines for Wine Club, and the wine industry has this two ends of the spectrum, sort of that rock star type winemaker versus the family estate grown doing this. And one of the things that I picked off your website that I think maybe you can speak to, and I think you've already spoke to a little bit, is it says farming is not what we do, it is who we are. Right. And it kind of speaks to the fact that winemaking isn't a practice of getting the grapes and then making them into wine. It's the entire vertical process of picking what to plant, planting it, managing it in the vineyard, managing them throughout the growth cycle, picking them, crushing them, and then making them into what inevitably, they're supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe speak to that and that philosophy. I'm sure we're probably ready for next wine too. So kind of speak to that as we transition into our next wine.
Well, the next one is the Hidden Horse, right?
Hidden Horse Red Blend.
I left it on the table out here. 1 second.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, as he grabs that, I believe they're in the middle of the crush season as well. So obviously we appreciate Matthew and the team taking some time away from their busy schedule. And I think he even said after this is done, he's got to go back out there so he can't party too much with us.
Yeah, well, you guys are a lot more fun than sitting on the crush pad right now. So this is a nice break. But yes, we are right in the middle of harvest. I think we're about halfway through is all. So we still got another 3 or 4 or 5 weeks left. So we'll see where we go. But to get to your point about the fact that farming is kind of, it's not just what we do, but it's kind of who we are. It is into that vein of that sustainability, and kind of like, we still prefer to do deals with a cup of coffee and a handshake to go to the tailgate of a pickup, and we like to take care of everything, but we are completely vertical, and we are at that end of the spectrum. And there's, like you said, there's basically two different manners of making wine. Is one, you go out and buy grapes and picking ingredients out of the spice cabinet, which is basically what every AVA is, and you go from there. Or two, you kind of stay vertical and whatever else, and that's the way we went. But I think the best way to kind of sum it up is that we've always considered ourselves to be wine growers, number one, and winemakers, number 1B. And that's because one has to come from the other, and unfortunately, fortunately, you can't start making wine unless you have good grapes. And so our general philosophy in the cellar, kind of an unwritten rule, is if we do our job in the vineyard, the only job in the cellar is to really not F up the grapes. And, we can massage them, but we're not going to manipulate or tweak them. And that we kind of hold that true if you want to kind of extrapolate that through the entire farming process or into the entire business operation or even into the entire just existence within the area here, is that, we will incorporate aspects of organic and conventional farming and whatever else is the case, because they both have benefits, long-term, short-term, exposure limitations for the guys that work for us, who are really our team members. And we have one guy that he started working for my grandparents about 9 months after I was born. And now he works for my brother and I. And so he's a friend. He's not even really an employee. I've grown up with the guy, right? And so he's just family at this point in time. And most everybody that we work with, that we're fortunate to have on our team, we really consider to be that aspect. And our parents live across the street now, and our grandmother still lives across the driveway. And but this gets kind of what's into the wine, is that we hope it's the personality that's kind of showing through also. And this wine, I think, is actually the one that we just poured. I think the Hidden Horse Red Blend is actually one that I think kind of shows pretty good personality. I referenced earlier that we like to make wine fun, and fun is a floating definition. Sometimes it's sitting in someplace like the French Laundry or Canlis in Seattle or something and having a ridiculous meal at the top Michelin restaurant in the area, or sometimes it's sitting on the tailgate of a pickup and drinking it out of a solo cup, and then there's everywhere in between, in stores, tables, with friends, by yourself, and we want that personality that we're equally parts serious, but also not too serious, only serious about the important things, and the rest of it can be a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more laughter involved. We want that to kind of show through in some of these wines. And this Hidden Horse, I think, is a really, really good example of it. In a nutshell, what it is it's a Bordeaux blend. About 95% of this wine, you'll notice it's non-vintage, but it's batch numbered. And unfortunately, I didn't bring the tech sheets with me as I ran in here, but this wine in descending order is always Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Malbec. And those four wines make up right around 95% of this wine on every batch. And the remaining 5% are going to be what we call the friends. and it's and it might be a little extra Syrah, or a little bit of, this one actually has a little bit of Syrah in there. Actually made it quite a bit. I didn't even realize that. But it might have a little Counois or Cinsault or Touriga National or Lemberger or whatever, because as we are a state fruit, and I'll get into the Yakima Valley in Washington here now that we're getting into the reds, we have a lot of varieties that we don't actually make, that we don't actually bottle, varieties that we either sell to people, varieties that we may take on in a new vineyard, and not know what we're doing with, whatever the case is. But whenever we come across a new variety in something that we're growing, then what we do is we'll always bring in maybe a ton and start for a couple of years and make wine out of it. So we can not only see how does that wine develop and what are the characteristics of it, but also so we know how it does that in relation to the growing techniques, so that we can actually become better growers for those who are buying that fruit from us in the future. So it's a little bit of R&D in that aspect, but it's also fun because we get to try out new things and say, ooh, that might be fun to put in a bottle at some point in time. So it's a little bit self-serving in that, in both sides of that one. So those are the friends that kind of go into this wine. So this is our non-vintage, I don't want to say run of the mill, but it's that easy drinking. We want it to be that every day, you pick it up off the shelf in the store, you can take it home, pay bills, unwind for the day. You can take it to your friend's house. You can pair it with a meal because it's big enough for that, but it's, as we like to say, it's easy enough to drink on the couch or watch a movie with, because it's just comfortable. You can always just pour another glass and enjoy the evening, or you can take it and pair it with the meal and put it with anything you want to. So it's really kind of the Swiss Army knife that's within our portfolio in that capacity. And we want it to be that way. And we call it Hidden Horse because the two mountains that we see, which is referencing now our name, is, and I think there's a picture of them somewhere that I sent you guys, but otherwise, if you pull up that AVA map, I can show you which little white dots on the map are the two mountains. But we, from all of our property, from all the houses, from all the vineyards, from everywhere, we see both Mount Adams and Mount Rainier on the horizon. So they're two of the four active but dormant volcanoes within Washington State. So none of them are extinct. They're just all sleeping, thank God. I mean, I remember when Mount St. Helens blew up, and I don't really need to go through that one again. So actually, right where your mouse is, that little white dot that's right there, that's Mount Rainier, and that one's Mount Adams right there. Yep. And so we see both of those from our place, and they are actually massively influential into everything that we're doing here, and all of their little brethren that are the Cascade Mountains actually are the reason why we can grow what we can here. So anyway, I'll finish up with this wine real fast, and then it's actually, if you want to just leave this map up, then we can kind of talk about that for a second. But so this wine is kind of our everyday go-to wine. It's like we said, we hope it's easy enough to drink on the couch or on the patio, but it's and maybe just unwind for the day, or help us, homeschooling, I guess, is what it is. COVID rules now, so maybe this is the homeschool wine. I'm not sure, but it's also big enough and significant enough and serious enough that it's not just a whimsical wimp, that you can actually, it's big enough that you can actually have it with a meal and pair it with a big meal that you want to. And I do it all the time. I mean, it's fun that way. It goes well with a lot of different foods. So, and if anybody has any questions, shout. I'm going to talk about this map real fast, and then so if anybody reads the questions, then just say so and feel free to interrupt me. It doesn't matter too much. So I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say most of you don't know that 2/3 of Washington's a desert. That most of you probably think that Washington is rainforest or pine trees and Emerald City all over the state. And that's, if you look at the map, it's really only the western third of the state is the green lush Wizard of Oz type of thing that we all think about. The other 2/3 of the state, which is like where I am, is desert. It's a high inland desert. And the reason we're a desert is where Mount Adams and Mount Rainier are. They're part of the Cascade Mountain Range. And those mountains actually go up into Canada, part of the coastal mountains of Canada, as well as they eventually work their way down through Oregon, and then kind of hang a slight eastern turn and eventually turn in the Sierra Nevada. So essentially it's this big spine of mountains that goes all the way from more or less Alaska all the way down to Mexico, and actually into, if you really want to get technical, down to the Sonoran Desert in that aspect. So these mountains are really what create the desert environment that we're in, and we're in a rain shadow effect. And I don't think this is the map, but so the rain shadow effect is basically where the mountains stop all the rain, and everything on the east side or on the leeward side of the mountains is going to be dry, and everything on the windward side of the mountains is wet, because what happens is the moisture rises up in the mountains and drops all the moisture, and then there's no more when it gets to the other side. So that's why Seattle gets about 36 inches of precipitation a year. And if you look at that map, on the very far kind of upper left corner of it, on the Olympic Peninsula, there's actually another set of mountain ranges out there. Right against the ocean there, they get about 400 inches of precipitation a year. Seattle gets about 36 inches of precipitation a year, and I get 6 inches of precipitation a year. And most of that is in the wintertime, so none in the growing season. And in doing that, it also allows us to be very hot in the summertime, very cool at night in the fall, especially in the fall, and very cold in the wintertime. So we have this massive temperature swing during the course of the year, but that helps with grapes and apples and cherries and everything else that we're doing, and it allows us to grow so many different varieties here, where so many other places in the world will say, this is the variety of this region. We're still the Wild West. I mean, we alone are growing like 35 different vinifera grapes in the vineyards that we have, and there's about 60 in the valley, 55 in the valley, I think, maybe. And they all grow really well. For instance, that Riesling grows 8 feet from our Syrah, which I think is 2 wines down the list, maybe, or next wine. And very, very few places in the world you can grow or would they even attempt to grow Riesling and Syrah 8 feet from each other? I mean, they might be in the same region, maybe. Very few times will you ever find them in the same vineyard, but very even in, less often you'll find them 8 feet from each other. And so this is what allows us to grow things here. So the mountains create this rain shadow effect. We're in this desert, we're hot. The aridness allows us to grow all these varieties that might have high mildew pressure or be kind of fickle and kind of finicky. And then the winter allows everything to go dormant and be able to rest and be able to get back into into form for the growing season. There you go. That's a perfect map of what a rain shadow effect is. So you can see by the time they get to here, there's nothing left in the clouds. And just as a matter of perspective, if you look at where like France is, the geography of France and topography of France is from the Atlantic Ocean. And for a point of reference, in France, it's illegal to artificially irrigate unless it's a state of emergency deemed by the federal government, because they get summer rains. And the reason they get that is, if you look at the topography of France, is it's a very gradual slope from the Atlantic all the way up to the Alps. And so they get pockets of rain that come in during the course of the growing season and allow the grapes to get whatever water they need. We don't get any. I mean, when I talk about 6 inches of precipitation, that's kind of the average. I mean, there's some years where it's a little bit less than that, actually. And so it is quite arid, and it's not uncommon in the summertime for it to be 90, 95, close to 100 degrees, maybe a little bit over 100, and only be 15% humidity. So, I mean, we don't have anything here, right? So, yes, the people that say it's like Colorado that way, exactly. The climate here is very much like Colorado, only we get less rain. And the question of, do we have to irrigate? Yes. If we didn't irrigate, nothing would grow here. We get irrigation water because of the Cascade Mountains. There's actually some reservoirs that are built on them, or in them, on the eastern slope of them, and the reservoirs capture the snow melt and rainfall, and then the reservoirs will release measured amounts of water into the river system, and the rivers use that. We use the rivers as a transportation method to take that measured amount of water to the canal heads. So we're actually not stripping any water from the river system itself. We're using the excess that would be wasted. And actually, it's like a net zero or a net positive gain for the river system anyway, because we're not actually having to take it and compete, and therefore the environment, like the fish and whatnot, are not competing with the irrigation needs. And that is one of the big differences between us and other parts of the world is like California, for instance. Their water systems are fed from mountains on the eastern side of the state, which feeds population and agriculture and recreation and industry and everything else. All of ours, everything that we're getting from, is actually designated just for agriculture and recreational use. It's not for municipalities at this point in time. So we're very fortunate in that point. All right.
Oop, I was just talking to myself as per usual. I was going to say, let's pivot to the Merlot if you got that handy.
Yeah, I was just going to do that. I figured I'd be babbling enough, actually.
There you go. No, you're doing a great job. I mean, obviously, that's great to hear.
I can kind of babble sometimes, so.
Well, it's interesting to talk about the different geography and the rain shadow effect, the Missoula floods, and all of that. I think a lot of the people on the call are pretty expert in that. That we've talked about that in many of our stores already, but it's always a great refresher to give them that context.
Yeah, no, that's great. So we'll get into the Merlot. If anybody has any questions, this area was formed through cataclysmic events, the Missoula flood, like you just referenced, all the volcanoes, the Pacific Ring of Fire, and then erosion. And we were at the slack water point, so we have totally different soil types than what Walla Walla has, because they were more of a settling pond. But that's the cool part. Like, we're so diverse here. It's in this state. It's really cool and crazy. All right, so this is the 2018 Merlot. You guys are first. I mean, it really has hit with you guys before it has hit anybody else. We're just at that vintage change now in some markets. So you guys, the next 3-4 wines are actually going to be, you guys are really the first on all of them. So this is the 2018 Merlot, and I'll be perfectly blunt with you guys. I haven't tasted it since we bottled it, so I'm going to taste it anew, just like you guys are. So bear with me. And I would love to get some feedback on it. What I can tell you about 2018 is it was a really consistent vintage. It was a fun year. This wine, actually, looking at the cheat sheet that's on the back of it, is 92% Merlot, 7% Cab Franc, and 1% Malbec. And I think the Yakima Valley was kind of made for varieties that need a little bit more acid, like this and Cabernet Franc. You know, you talk to some people and they think that Merlot and Yakima were like, they were kind of made for each other. I won't disagree with that. I'll throw a Cab Franc in the mix when we, you know, at some point in time. But the Merlot always works well here. When we got into, you know, at the post Sideways movie and that time frame when everybody stopped drinking Merlot for a while, I'm a Merlot person. I was starting to shy away from things, and it wasn't because of the movie. It was just because Merlot was becoming bad. I mean, we as producers around the country were just making bad Merlot for a period of time there, and we as consumers were smart enough to shy away from it. But one of the things that I realized was I was still drinking our Merlot, and I don't drink our wines very often, mainly from a quality control standpoint. I just don't like to drink the same thing all the time. And that, therefore, I can actually say with all conviction that I actually like our wines, because it's when I come to them, they're relatively new and fresh for me. But I kept drinking Merlot from ours, and then from the valley, and really kind of from the state. But I kind of sat down and did like kind of a well, why type of question one day. And I realized as I was drinking some Merlots from around the country and around Washington State was that Merlots were just getting boring. The reason why is a lot of them were missing the acid. And I think acid is key to Merlot. It makes the fruit pop, it makes the aromatics pop, it gives it this distinct characteristic. And in our area, with our elevation, with the Missoula flood impacts, with the rain shadow effects, with diurnal shifts, with everything that we have here, we don't really have to worry about keeping acid in the grapes. In fact, sometimes it's too much acid in the grapes. And the acid really helps preserve it. It helps elongate the aging lifestyle of it, or lifespan of it, and it helps push fruit and aromatics. And I think certain varieties like Merlot, Riesling, and Cab Franc in particular, those three really need that. And that's why I think it does so well here. So this wine, man, that's actually pretty good. This is a blend of both Schmidt and Copeland Vineyard. So Copeland's the one I've been talking about. Schmidt is the new one, actually, where part of the Sauvignon Blanc came from, but the Merlot is on the very high side of the Schmidt Vineyard. But what's fun is that Schmidt Vineyard has very, very deep soils. In fact, until 7 years ago, it was an old Bing cherry orchard, because they grew really well in the deep soils. But it has a totally different depth characteristic now the grapes than what Copeland does. Copeland has a very shallow soil, almost like non-existent, which is really kind of crazy. And it has this real bright acidity and real finesse, big but elongated tannins. And the fruit tends to be a little bit brighter, whereas Schmidt has this deeper characteristic on the fruit and a little bit more jammy kind of fruit, and almost a little bit jammy and softer tannins to it. And so when we combined the two of them, we thought it made a pretty damn special wine in both Merlot and Cab Sauv. And I like the fact that, you know, Bill Rose, you said that the Merlots, each taste it kind of gets better, and that's one of the things that with our wines we actually kind of pride ourselves on, is that the last glass is always better than the first glass. Not to say that the first glass is you know, bad or needs to open up. It's just our wines tend to open up and open up and open up and open up, and that's what we really enjoy, because we think they become much more versatile wines at that point in time. I personally hate wines where the best glass is the first glass, and then after that it's like, oh, I'll have a beer now. I want the last glass to be better than the first glass. I mean, it's just, to me, that's the sign of a good wine, a wine that's well made. So this is only about 45% brand new oak, something like that. We use almost all French here, and you'll taste that in all these wines, mainly because our high acid and our kind of more finesse tannins. I think that the French oak works a little bit better with our fruit. It kind of frames it in. In fact, I've had a lot of our reds next to some of the kind of the preeminent not necessarily the first growth wines from those regions, but I've had them next to wines from some of the preeminent regions within France. And a lot of the structure is very similar between what we have here and what I was tasting from parts of France. So I'm pretty excited about that.
How does the obviously Washington gets a little bit more sun, or a lot more days of sun compared to Napa, and the different styles of Merlot from different places. How does the sun exposure in Washington affect, I guess, all the reds that we're going to be talking about?
Massively. So we're at we're just about the 47th parallel. So we're actually quite a bit further north. And if you look at it on a worldwide map, we're actually kind of right in between the upper end of Bordeaux and kind of lower end of Burgundy at that point. So we're in this kind of weird region if you look at it, you know, in a parallel universe there. But what it does is our growing season actually a little bit more, it is shorter than what California is, but it's a little bit more intense and a little bit more compact. Because of the extra hours of sun. So we get in the summertime, during most of the growing season, we get about 2.5 hours more daylight per day than what Napa gets. So like on June 21st, the longest day of the year, it's usually not getting dark here until 10:15, something like that. And sunrise is like 4:20 in the morning. So it's very, very short night, very long day. And that helps us be able to grow these big, like the big red varieties, because even though we don't have as long of a growing season, it's more compact in that capacity. And it allows those big reds to be able to develop. But conversely, it also allows us to have the versatility to grow things that don't need as much, like Riesling and Blaufränkisch and, you know, I don't know, whatever else might be out there, Grenache Blanc and Picpoul and whatever, you know, those kind of things. So that actually is kind of the one of the real reasons why we can grow so many different varieties here, and grow the big reds as big as they can be coming out of the state. But then the diurnal shift that we get, especially this time of year, is huge on that also. And just in case people don't know what a diurnal shift is, it's just a temperature change between daytime and nighttime. So especially in the fall, it's not uncommon for us to have 35 to 50 degree temperature swings from daytime to nighttime. So it'll be 85 during the day and it'll be 40 at night. And that helps lock in flavors, acids, colors, tannins, the whole 9 yards, and be able to have that fruit pop and the wines get the color and the structure and everything else. So in the way that, for those of you who are familiar with the Napa area, which I'm guessing most of you are, like by and large, a lot of people would consider some of the best fruit to be coming from the higher elevations of Napa. And that's because it cools down a little bit more up there than it does kind of on the valley floors. And the higher elevation, like Howell Mountain type of thing, their characteristics are going to be much more similar to what we have here than what you would get from the valley floor of Napa or the valley floor of Sonoma or Sassoon Valley or something of that nature. So
that's perfect. This wine, like you said, I mean, it continues to evolve and continues to get better the more you drink it. I don't have it in front of me, but I remember drinking it with Matt, and I think we opened it and then we came back to it probably an hour or two later, as we always typically do, to make sure we're making the right decision. And it definitely checked all the boxes we wanted to check and confirmed our decision with selecting this wine. So
well, thank you. We call it Merlot.
Oh, and you know, I mean, you talked a little bit about, you know, sideways and you know, a gluttony of poorly made Merlot. I think what Washington State has done for Merlot is bring it back. Obviously, producers like yourself, but as a whole, Washington Merlot is this own little distinct beast, which is wonderfully distinct from what unfortunately some people have been exposed to by way of poorly made Merlot, or Merlot that is barely 80% Merlot blended with a bunch of other things, right? So this is true to what it should be, with a little bit of hints of a few other things to sort of spice it up. So
Thank you.
I think we have 3 more wines here. We have Syrah, Cab Sauv, and Cab Franc. These 3 wines, for those of you guys that don't know, we have the 3 featured wines for the wine club, which are the Merlot, the Hidden Horse, and then the Riesling. And then I believe most of all the other stores brought in some of these additional wines, meaning the Sauv Blanc that we already had, the Syrah that we're about to have, the Cab Sauv and the Cab Franc as well. We brought those in limited quantities, so the stores that have them, once they're gone, maybe we can twist Matthew's arm to get more sent to us if we blow through it, but grab it while you can, because these are wonderful wines as well.
Well, thank you. All right, so this is the 2018 Syrah. Again, first time I've had this since we actually bottled it also, so these are as new to me as they are to you at this stage of the game. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but we're gonna do this all together. So Syrah from us, it's all Copeland Vineyard, and this actually literally grows 8 feet from the Riesling, kind of on the rest of the rock pile, the rest of that gravel pit finger that we have out in the middle of the vineyard. Which again, there's really no, unless you understood the reason why the Missoula flooding and the erosion and the way the Yakima River was carved through here, you'd walk out there and be like, why in the heck is there all this big cobble that's sitting there? And the reality of it is most of the rock actually, if you ever make it into Montana and go north of Missoula up the Big Blackfoot River, and you look at the river, the rock that's in the river on the side of the road, it's the same rock that's in our vineyard, which is really a crazy concept when you actually think about how far away that is and how much material was carried down. But Syrah to me likes to struggle, but it's also like Riesling, where I said earlier that Riesling will really tell you kind of where it's from, the soil type, the personality of the people that are making it, so on and so forth. Syrah does the same thing on the red variety. Syrah is the great chameleon. It will go anywhere, it'll fit with anything, and it usually is pretty darn good. So that actually is a great map. I'm not even sure where you got that one from, but I love it.
It's your website. It's your website.
Oh, that's on our website?
Yeah.
We just updated our website. I honestly haven't even looked at our website yet. I haven't had time. So my brother took care of it and checked it off. I'm like, all right, I trust it. We'll go with it. So you can see the green and that kind of red. I'm sorry, the red and that kind of light yellow green color. That's the yellow green color is the Riesling. The more red color is the just to the right of it is the Syrah. And that is right where that big finger of gravel comes down, and then just to the left of it would be, you start dissipating from there, it becomes more sandy loam. Just to the right of it in that green section, it's where actually our Lemberger or Blaufränkisch is, but that starts going down into a little bit of a gully, and you have much deeper soil, like silty loam right there. And so these two varieties sit right over the crest and on the beginning fringes of the rock pile. And I can taste all of that in the Syrah. And it's like, this is actually 2% Petite Syrah. And I'll get into that in 1 second. But yeah, the Syrah coming from our area tends to have this real blueberry cobbler kind of characteristic to it. And by and large, it's more kind of like mid to upper Rhone styling. It's not going to be that big. It's going to be big, but it's not going to be that real kind of gamey, meaty, kind of southern Rhone style Syrah that some of us are kind of familiar with. Ours is going to be a little bit more of that kind of finesse, mid Rhone to upper Rhone styling. This one, just by smelling it, again, I haven't had this since we bottled it. It feels as though it kind of moved down the valley just a little bit into a little bit more of that kind of meaty characteristic. But I still get some of that blueberry cobbler in there. A little bit more bacon fat, which is pretty characteristic of this vineyard on this variety as well. I'm loving this wine. I don't know what you guys are all thinking about this, but this is the first time I've actually added Petite Syrah into it. Historically, this is actually the very first vintage that we've ever blended this Syrah. Historically, it's always been 100% Syrah. And I'm not one of those guys, and we are not one of those wineries that says something has to be 100%. We're not that romantic about it. That again, I said earlier, we're kind of in the flavor business. We enjoy making the best possible quality and product that we possibly can. And if that means like on the Merlot, you saw that had a little bit of Cab Franc and a little bit of Malbec in there just to kind of fill in the holes. Like, I'm cool with that. Historically, the Syrah has not needed anything because it has just been lights out. In 2018, it was still lights out, but it was kind of a weird vintage, even though it was a fantastically consistent vintage, and I love it on the Merlot. For some reason, the Syrah struggled a little bit more on it. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if it was a fermentation thing. I'm not sure if it was a growing conditions thing. I'm not sure if it was a vineyard practices thing, or if it was just as simple as we put the wrong barrels on it. I don't know what it was, but it was lacking just a touch. And so we ended up adding a little bit of Petit Syrah to it to give it a little bit of depth, to fill in kind of the holes that we wanted. And you can see the 2% Petit Syrah it changed the whole damn thing. And it's really kind of fun when you sit back and do a little bit of blending here and there, and you can see how just a 1% here, 0.5% there, 5% there changes the whole dynamic of the wine. And the tricky part there is obviously not doing it so much where you have now changed the whole personality of the wine. But I think like this to me smells like Syrah, it tastes like Syrah, it feels like Syrah. And I'm gonna have to seriously consider in 2019 maybe putting some Petit Syrah back into the Syrah now too. I might have been converted, so I'm not sure.
How do you? I guess the question is recognizing that when you're blending the wine and making that decision of I'm going to add 2% of this, 1% of this. You know the wine's going to be different after it's bottled and been in the bottle for a year, 2 years before it's released. How much does that flavor profile change, and how do you evaluate, okay, I know in a year this decision, this is going to be the right decision? Or is it trial and error somewhat?
Well, it's all trial and error. Some of it is just knowing the sites and knowing the varieties. A large part of that is, but some of it is also being able to kind of just pick the pieces out of it as you're tasting it and as you're sitting there and evaluating it. So what we do is we'll look at it and I did this last night on the Zoom call, and we can do this tonight if you guys would like to. I don't know how much time you guys all want to do with this, but we will start on the very macro side of it. So we'll just taste the individual varieties. We'll taste the individual barrel, the individual lots as a whole, and we'll work our way down to the micro side of it, down to individual barrels, individual like specific lots, whatever the case might be. And then we actually will we just start doing 50 or 100 milliliter samples with graduated cylinders and pipettes, and we'll say we're doing Syrah. Okay, well, historically we've always been 100% Syrah, so we would start with doing equal representation of all the lots based off of gallonage and how much we want to make. Say, okay, how does that taste? And we just kind of start working both forwards and backwards from there. On things like the Merlot, what we'll do is we might take the previous 2 or 3 vintages and have those bottles that are sitting right there because we know that those were blended in some capacity. They weren't 100% varietals. And we'd take those bottles and taste them next to, we'd replicate that based off of this vintage on those percentages and see where we want to get to and use that as a starting point. There's not real rocket science that's involved with it. A lot of it is just legwork and tasting and tasting and tasting and tasting and kind of evaluating as you go. And when we think we're getting close or we think that we're getting fatigued, what we do is we actually will make up essentially little jars, sample bottles of 100 milliliter samples, and we'll let them sit for 2 or 3 days because you're right, things do change and they evolve, and what you taste right now in the first 5 minutes, in 24 hours, as the flavors and the compounds and the elements are all melding together, it's going to taste completely different. It's kind of like, I don't know. Here's a very basic analogy, very simple, and I'm kind of a simpleton when it comes to this. It's kind of like when you make a big pot of soup or a big chili or something of that nature, right? You taste it when you first put it all together, and it tastes one way, like that's really good, perfect, it's done. You taste it in 2 hours after it's had time to simmer, and it will taste a little bit different. You put it in the fridge after you're done having dinner for the night, and you open it up the next day or 2 days later because you're going to heat it up and have it for lunch or dinner. You taste it when it's cold, and you're like, wow. Okay, I get it, but it's not quite as good. Once it warms up, you get more flavors out of it. But then once it warms up completely after it's had time to sit in the fridge for 2 days or a day, and then you've rewarmed everything, it tastes completely different than when you first made it in that first 5 minutes. That's kind of what we do with the wine as we're doing this. And then we're also kind of trying to try to see around the corners with it and say, okay, you know what, this has a real rough back end, but I like everything about it. In 6 months, that real green tannic back end is going to smooth out, and we think that's really just going to complete the wine. So some of it is just actually patience, and some of it is just try to see around the corners and identify the pieces that are maybe not 100% complete, but knowing that time will fix a lot of things, and see how that stuff ends up. Does that kind of clear as mud?
At least for me, I mean, that's a great explanation. I've always sort of wondered, as you're tasting those wines out of barrel, lots, individual things, and you're blending them together, in 6 months, a year, whatever bottle age, and then obviously once you start talking about cellar age, which is a whole other thing, that it's going to evolve. And how do you make that decision to have that best wine along that path? So I definitely get it. Hopefully everybody else does. If not, we're going to move on and they can figure it out on their own.
Well, it's like Bill Rose just said, it's a great follow-up even 3 minutes later. Like, it does change that much over time, right? And it's just one of those things. It's kind of hard, but you just kind of do it and you say, okay, I hope it's good enough. And that's Syrah is a good example of it. We actually didn't bottle that when we were scheduled to. We put it all together. We didn't like it. We said, you know what? It needs another 2 months in barrel. So we put it back to barrel so it would have time to sit there and meld together and get a little bit softer with a little bit more time in the barrel and a little bit more barrel component to it. And after 2 months, it was that much better. So we said, okay,
Looks like you're opening the Cab Sauv, it looks like. So everybody's ready.
And if you guys want, we can actually do a little bit of that experiment. I don't know how much time you guys want to have on this, but I'll kind of do the rough thing that we did last night on the tasting. That was fun. I mean, we can just do a very rough mad scientist. You guys can see what the difference is, or not. I mean, I just explained it to you guys. So it's up to you guys. This is your thing.
I think we're trying to shoot for about maybe another 10-15 minutes. I know the debate's probably started between the VPs.
Well, let's get through the wines, and if anybody wants to do that, we can do that in 10 seconds or a minute when we're done. But we'll get through the last couple of wines, and then we'll see where we want to go. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
Perfect. All right, so Cab Sauv, 2018. Again, this is both Schmidt and Copeland. I explained the differences between Schmidt and Copeland when we tasted the Merlot. And this had the same kind of characteristic to it. The Schmidt has a little bit more depth as far as the darkness of the fruit. Copeland has a little bit more kind of overripe red fruit, and more of that kind of elongated finesse tannins, where this has a little bit more of that softer tannin kind of characteristic in the Schmidt Vineyard. So this one we felt was kind of the same characteristics, same thing. But one of the things that we've been able to do with the Schmidt Vineyard and on the Cabernet specifically is we've been able to start matching specific yeast to this vineyard. It was planted more of a clone thing when on the Cab, but then we started experimenting with a couple of different yeasts so we could try to dial that in a little bit and kind of bring out the full nuances of the vineyard. And I think we're starting to do a pretty good job on it. And what's really interesting is the Schmidt Vineyard holds so much more water because it has literally like 25 feet of topsoil here. That we probably water the Schmidt Vineyard maybe as often as we do the Copeland Vineyard, because the Copeland is mostly sand and rock, so you have to water it about once every week or once every 10 days for a few hours just so it stays a little bit wet and growing. The vineyard here at Schmidt it holds so much water that you actually can't water it very often. Otherwise, you'll just get these overgrown bushes out there that you might as well just make nothing but rosé out of, which we love doing, but we're not going to do with this vineyard. So this has a little bit. This is actually 84% Cab, 6% Merlot, 6% Cab Franc, and 4% Tempranillo. The Tempranillo is a new one for us, but the 84%, it was good at 90, but it was a better wine when we knocked the Cab back a little bit more and brought in that 4% Tempranillo. The Tempranillo kind of helped round it out just a little bit. Like I remember this one pretty vividly when we were doing the blending trials that we were just talking about. And as much as I wanted to leave it closer to 90, I felt like it was a better, more complete wine when we got it down to the 84. Still, it actually tasted more like Cab at that point in time, which was interesting. And as you guys know, in this country, unless you're an Oregon Pinot Noir producer, it can be actually as low as 75% and still be called that varietal. We don't like to go much below about 85 or 84, or 83, somewhere in that ballpark. So on this one, we were getting kind of down to where our floor was on things. But again, by actually knocking it back just a touch from that 90 down to that 84 and adding just a little bit more Merlot and a little bit and that little Tempranillo into it, it actually tasted more like Cabernet to us than it did at closer to 100%. Had a little bit more all the way through of the characteristics we were looking for. So like when I smell this, I get a little bit of that kind of green vegetal characteristic that I want in both Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. Like I expect to have a touch of green in there. Otherwise, you don't know it's one of the Cabernets. But this actually, I like how this thing is. Got a little bit jammy to it. It's got a little bit roundness to it. There's still that good acid that you get from what we think is our style and our fruit and our vineyards and our region. But it tastes, to me, it tasted like a pretty complete Cab Sauv at this stage of the game. This is about this is about 55% new oak on it. Again, mostly French. This has a touch of American on it, not a lot. We just don't use a lot of American oak here. It's just not. It's not my jam. I wish I liked it better because price point wise, it's way better for the my brother and the accountant like it when I buy American oak barrels a lot better than when I buy French oak barrels, but stylistically they don't fit our profile as well. I mean, small amounts go a long ways. So
speak a little bit. Obviously, the Syrah, I believe, had a little bit more punch of alcohol in it, 14.5, 14.7. This is
something like that. Yeah.
Lower than where you see a lot of cabs anymore. Cabs seem to be creeping up 14.5, 14.6, 14.7. This is a little bit lower end of that spectrum. Speak to that sort of.
So that's actually our region. One of the things that I love about the Yakima Valley and about the Rattlesnake Hills in particular is the fact that we can generally pick at slightly lower sugars than what everybody else picks at and still have the right flavors. We may be picking a little bit later into the growing year, which I don't mind whatsoever. Everybody else freaks out about it. I say, let it go, as long as the weather's good. And so we can typically pick a slightly lower alcohol or slightly lower sugars, which will lead to slightly lower alcohols, but the wines will be phenolically developed. They'll be flavored developed. They'll be, we may have to adjust acid here and there, but very rarely. But beyond that, like they become pretty stable wines at that point in time. And I have this conversation with almost the same people across the state just about every year at exactly the same time in February at the Grape Growers Convention. Like, I mean, I've been saying for years that I think there's a difference between ripe and sweet. Sweet is a measure of sugar. Ripe is a flavor profile, right? And as I've said a couple times tonight, like we're in the flavor business. Like I want sugars to be up to a certain minimum, right? But I could care less if they get. I don't measure grapes being ready to pick based off of what the sugar level is. I measure them based off of how do they taste. That crazy concept, right? If it tastes good, let's pick it. If it doesn't taste good, let's let it hang. And the one thing that you can never replace is time. And the only way you develop flavors is with time on the vine. That's the hang time that you've heard wineries talk about and wine regions talk about and whatever else is the case. Well, as someone was mentioning earlier about climate change or whatever, is that as things have gotten ever so slightly warmer and things have moved forward a little bit more, like it's not uncommon for sugars to start spiking a little bit earlier than what they typically did, especially before the nights start really cooling off and people start freaking out, including, we do sometimes. We have to take a deep breath and they say, whoa, the numbers are getting there. We need to pick. And I always say, no, I'm not picking Cab on the 5th of September, guys. Let's hold off. Like I can promise you without even tasting them that they don't have any flavors yet. It's just physiologically not possible at this point in time. And I have the same conversation with people all over the state every year in February at the Grape Growers Convention. All the guys that were bragging about the fact that they had Cab picked September 5th, and they were done with harvest and all this other stuff. You know, in February, every one of them was like, you know, just doesn't taste the way I thought it was going to taste. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. You know, it's not rocket science on this one. It's just you got to get some time on there. And so in doing so, in this area, we actually are allowed to have a little bit more hang time on things because we get a little bit more of the temperature shift than what the rest of the state does. Even by just a degree or two a day, that makes a huge difference. And it allows us to get a little bit extra hang time, pick at a little bit lower sugars, and therefore have a little bit lower alcohols on almost everything. I mean, the Syrah is listed at 14, I believe, and the Cab Sauv is listed at 14, and both of those are actually slightly higher than what they normally are for us. Normally they're in the upper 13s. The Cab Franc that we'll taste next actually crept over 14, which is very unusual for that variety, but it did, and it is what it is at that point in time. So anyway, I don't know what is the Cab acceptable to most people?
Everybody got quiet. They're still drinking it, right?
Okay.
I mean, as we're sort of venturing into the wines, obviously all of them have some ageability to them as you're getting ready to do the Cab Franc, but maybe speak to the ageability of some of these versus the others.
Versus the others?
I mean, are some of them more ageable than I mean, obviously Riesling, people assume they need to drink it right away. I think that's a misconception. You talked about that already, but you know, Sauvignon Blanc drank young. The ageability of the red blend, the Merlot, all of these. You know, when would you say is the maximum ageability of some of these?
Honestly, that is a tough question for me to answer on an annual basis. What I could actually say is, out of all the wines, I think the Sauvignon Blanc probably has the least amount of ageability to it, mainly because I just don't think Sauvignon Blanc ages incredibly well as a whole. And I could be wrong about that, but that's just kind of what my experience is. I think Riesling ages incredibly well. In fact, ours, when it becomes a year old, like anybody that has a bottle of this in like February or March, what you'll start noticing is some that kind of petroleum kind of viscosity kind of picking up in there, like you get from some of the good Mosels from Germany, which I love in Riesling. And our stuff ages pretty well that way. All of the reds age exceptionally well. In fact, I've talked about the physiological characteristics of this area and the way the grapes handle things and the acid and the tannins and lower sugars and whatever else, which all lead to ageability. We've actually had to adjust vineyard practices a little bit because sometimes when those things are so extremely good, it makes the wines less approachable at an early age. And none of us as consumers really like to hold on to wines for 3 years after we bought it before we drink it, right? We buy it, we want to drink it now. And that's just the way we are. And I'm exactly 100% the same way. So we've actually had to throttle back some of our vineyard practices to be able to make the wines as approachable as they are today as we're tasting these, since we just bottled these like 4 months ago. And so what we're, otherwise, if I didn't do that, you probably wouldn't even want to taste any of our wines until they were in the bottle for a year or a year and a half, because they have that kind of ageability to them on a natural basis. So with that, a little bit of vineyard adjustment on there and a little bit of winery practice adjustment on there, I would say most of these reds, if not all of them, are going to be exceptional in that 8 to 10 year range. As I'm tasting all these right now, this might change in a week after they've aged even further. But as I'm tasting these all right now, I think that Merlot probably has the most amount of ageability on it at the moment. But that might change because, as you guys all know, wine does one of these things. It has a life cycle, and one month, 1 day, 1 year, you taste it and you think it's way past its prime, or it's just not even there yet. In the next month, day, year, it might be, holy cow, this thing has another 3 years before it's even going to be good, type of thing. But historically, our wines age really, really, really well. As a point of context, our very first vintage, which was 2002, my brother and I opened up a bottle of Cab Sauv at Christmas last year, so almost a year ago. And those plants in 2002 were actually only 3 years old, and I knew nothing about growing grapes. It was like it was like go over here until you hit something and then turn left and then go over here and turn right. Like it was literally like we were figuring out how to grow grapes on the fly. Even though we had these great guys on speed dial, we were literally trying to figure out how to grow grapes on the fly. But we opened up the first vintage at Christmas a year ago, almost a year ago, and it was finally at that point where we were like, you know what, that stuff just needs to be drank or make a sauce out of it. It's getting to the point where it needs to happen, right? And so that was, I mean, this is 2002 to 2019. What is that? An 18-year-old wine at that point in time. So I mean, that was from a young vineyard, and the vines have only gotten more mature and bigger, and the grapes have actually done that. So these things will still age really well, but I'd say 8 to 10 years on probably a minimum basis for most of these things.
If you can keep them and not drink them.
Yeah. My point in all that is I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah. No, I'm the same way. I'm the same way. It's like, I want to build a cellar. I'm like, why do I need a cellar? I drink everything that comes into my house. So.
Yeah. My guess is that these wines will last longer than your patience will.
Yep. So we're on the Cab Franc now.
Yeah. We saved this one to last. This is kind of what I do because I'm a Cab Franc guy. Sorry. I love Cab Franc. I think it's my favorite red variety. And I personally think that this region of the state, the entire Rattlesnake Hills sub-AVA, I think is the best region in the entire state of Washington to grow Cab Franc. And I'll stand on this very thin twig and I'll jump up and down until it breaks, but I'm not sure it's maybe not the best place in the entire West Coast to grow Cab Franc. And it's not us. If it was us, I'd tell you straight up that I'm a homer, and I'm being egotistical about that. But when I taste the Cab Franc that comes from places like Owen Rowe and DeBrule Vineyards and Stevens Winery out of Seattle, but makes Cab Franc out of grapes from this area, and Andrew Will from their Two Blondes Vineyard, and all these other vineyards and all these that are producing these Cab Francs that wineries from all over the state of Washington are producing, it gives me a little bit of backstory, or it gives me a little bit of knowledge to say that all of these things are good. Like some of the wineries, they just don't like their wines. Like I'll just be blunt about that. But the wines are all, you can tell the grapes were grown in such a manner that they just are kind of second to none. And I just, everything we've talked about so far leading up to this, with the Riesling, with the Merlot, with the Cab, with even the Syrah to that point, that leads into why I think the Cab Franc is so good here. It keeps some acid to it. You get a little touch of greenness to it. To us, it's the most difficult of reds to grow. That's why it's actually a reserve label for us. It's our prerogative. So some year, we actually, if it doesn't hit all the marks, we don't bottle it as a single varietal. We will just blend it away into something. Like it'll be a big piece of the hidden work some year, whatever the case might be, right? But luckily, we've only done that twice, and in reality, I should have only done it once, but I wimped out one year because I didn't have the patience and I got nervous. In reality, it probably would have been the best one we ever made. But I like Cab Franc a lot. I love how it has a kind of floral characteristic to it. It has some oomph to it, but it doesn't necessarily kick you in the face like Cabernet Sauvignon does. But it's still, to me, it just kind of hits all. I like the elegance that Cab Franc has. Maybe that's the best way to come across. So I tend to like it, and it really is it's probably the most difficult of the Bordeaux, and maybe the most difficult red to grow in general. So.
I think you have some believers based on the comments, and I've always been a believer. Cab Franc's one of my favorite varietals in Washington, Cab Franc in particular. But the comments about the Cab Franc are quite hidden on everything.
So thank you. This has a little bit of Merlot, just kind of help fill in the holes. Again, I'm not romantic enough that it has to be 100%. If it is, great. If not, I don't lose sleep over it. And by the way, you guys were asking about the mountains earlier. I forgot to mention on the back label of every bottle that you guys see, there's a picture on there. Those are the two mountains we see, and that's actually a view from Copeland Vineyard. So the mountain on the left is Mount Adams, the mountain on the right is Mount Rainier, just as a point of reference. So.
Hey, Matthew, I have a question. It's not a wine-related question, but it's an alcohol-related question. and it goes back to your comment about tree fruit.
Yes.
I love ciders. I love wine made from pears.
Uh-huh.
do you ferment any wine or any of the tree fruit into any wonderfulness?
No.
All right. Well, this conversation's over.
I think
No,
you guys said. I think you guys said you sold the. You guys don't have any of the tree fruit anymore, do you?
no, we actually don't have any more tree fruit.
Okay.
Are
I
technically.
I take a nap every once in a while, and that must have been the part of the time where I took a nap.
No. It's that's actually a great question though, because it's becoming more pertinent every year around here. We are actually kind of silent partners in a little apple orchard, but those all go to fresh markets, so they will end up in your grocery stores, at Hy-Vee or wherever the case might be. But it's the apples, primarily the apples grown in this valley, are all for fresh markets. So they go not only all over the country, but they go all over the world they're Washington apples. You guys have all seen the stickers there. So historically, they're not typically varieties that would be made into cider. They're not the old cider style apples. However, that is starting to change a little bit. There are a couple of cideries in the valley now that are doing a great job with stuff, although they are typically using the cull apples and using things like Fuji's and Galas and Granny Smiths and stuff like that. They're not using old Gravensteins and Hausers and whatever the old antique apples are.
Yeah.
The cider apples are. But this valley's all been fresh market for all tree fruit. Has basically been fresh market, more or less.
They do make a port, Brian.
What's that?
We do make a port.
They do make a port though, Brian.
Very nice. Yeah, I love to see that. With the explosion of different ciders and some of those things and pear ciders, I just thought it was interesting when you discussed that part of it about an hour ago.
No, and you're absolutely right, and it's a great question, and it's one of those ones that I've always been a little bit flummoxed by. Also, is that this valley is a little bit kind of confusing at times, if you will. It's this huge agricultural valley. It's basically like a smaller version of the Central Valley of California. But what we grow here, and everybody knows about apples and sweet cherries and now wine grapes and wine, but one of the big crops in this valley is hops, and there's actually about 75% of the nation's hops are grown in this valley, which is about 40 or 42% of the worldwide hops, right? But up until the last 5 or 6 years, there was always only one brewery in the valley. Everything went either to Anheuser-Busch or Miller or across the universe to microbreweries. And only within about the last 5 or 6 years have we started getting a critical mass of breweries now. So it's always been a little bit confusing to me. I'm like, wait a minute, we have this we actually grow the world's beer here, but yet we only have like one brewery. Like what is the problem? So along with that, I think ciders are the next step. I think cideries will be the next step that come along. So we started with grapes and wine. Now breweries are starting to take place, and small ones at that. I think, and now we have I think 2 cideries in the valley. Once that kind of starts, you'll get a couple more that happen, and we'll start getting a little bit more of a critical mass.
You're actually
Brian's more of a hard seltzer White Claw guy anyway, though.
Well, I love me some White Claw. There's no doubt about that. You're actually starting to see quite a bit of ciders brewed with hops as well. We tried some, last week from California, which is interesting.
Yeah, there are. You can make alcohol out of anything. I mean, people make it out of dandelions. Whatever.
Lots of fun stuff. Well, obviously, we're getting a little bit off the rails. I guess maybe that's after 7 wines that happens for sure. So, this has been immensely entertaining and educational. I mean, we do these a lot, and it's always great to blend some amazing wines with history and geography and philosophy of winemaking. There's a lot of great things. I know getting to some of the winemaking regions of Washington are a little bit more challenging, but I know that if you are ever in the vicinity or plan to head out to Washington to the winemaking regions, we can obviously hook you guys up with a visit and things like that. I do want to point out a couple other things. I know all of the stores have pre-orders for the wines. If you like them, the Google forms are still up, and I think they're staying up until Monday for most stores. Like I said, some of these were brought in very limited supply for some of the states. I think like Curtis in Wisconsin might have brought in 1 case of each of the extra wines. Same thing with a few of the other states. So if you like these, I would reach out to your local store owner. Make sure you put in your quote-unquote dibs for those. If we run out, we can get a hold of Matthew and see if we can get more headed your way. The wines, again, through the Wine Club. If you're not a part of Wine Club, this is a great way to try the Wine Club. I would encourage you to reach out to your local store and sign up for that, because we have some amazing wines coming down the road. I already have somebody that ordered half a case. Great. I don't have any more. For some other regions as well. So really appreciate everything. Hopefully everybody had a wonderful evening. Learned a lot about Washington wines. And thank Matthew for all of the time.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.
Yeah. You guys, thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. The last question, what did I just pour myself a little extra, was Cab Franc. But you guys, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this, and it's really, truly been my pleasure. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. We'll answer the best we can, and we'll go from there.
Knocked it out of the park. Perfect, guys. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Prost.